Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning. Mazel tov again, Miriam. Okay. There are extra copies of the Moreh Nevukhim over here if anyone doesn't have a copy. It's been, I want to, first of all, wish you all a Chodesh Tov, a Guten Chodesh, and welcome you back from wherever you've been. It's been a while since, been a few weeks since we've had this year. So I want us just to get our bearings. We're still in the introduction of the Moreh Nevukhim, but we're going to be out of it soon. I hope within the next couple of weeks. We are at the very bottom of page 11, and what we were talking about is the Rambam's approach to both the words of the prophets and the words of the sages. Both the Nevi'im and Chazal communicate to us on multiple levels of meaning. And they need to do so because there is a certain amount of very profound information that they wish to communicate to us that if it's put in the wrong hands of people who are not sophisticated enough to appreciate what they're saying, it could be distorted and misinterpreted and used in a very injurious way. So the previous analogy that the Rambam had referenced was a statement from the sages which talks about finding a pearl that's lost in your house by using a candle. The candle is very inexpensive, but it illuminates the room so that you can find the pearl. And the Rambam had said that that's one type of esoteric communication that you'll find in the rabbis and in the Nevi'im, where the external doesn't cost very much at all. It doesn't have an appearance of niceness at all. It's worthless, but the deeper meaning has all of the value. But the Rambam says that more often than not, we will find that both the external and the esoteric have beauty to them and have value. It's just that you don't get lost on the external, which is like silver, when the internal is so much more valuable, like gold. And that's where he quotes the pasuk from Mishlei, Tapuchei kesef al masku yosov davar dabur al ofnav. Tapuchei kesef b'maskuyos, tapuchei zahav b'maskuyos kesef davar dabur al ofnav. That he describes from Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei this idea of some kind of artwork where the sculpted golden apples are behind an overlay of silver spokes, and only when either you spin the silver, you spin the wheel, or you look very closely, very up close, can you see the apples in the background. So that's the analogy that he gave, and we really that's what we left off with. And really, let's start on the top of page 12, the fourth line. The sages accordingly said that a saying uttered with a view to two meanings is like an apple of gold overlaid with silver filigree work having very small holes. Now see how marvelously this dictum describes a well-constructed parable. For he says that in a saying that has two meanings, he means an external and an internal one, the external meaning ought to be as beautiful as silver, while its internal meaning ought to be more beautiful than the external one, the former being in comparison to the latter as gold is to silver. Its external meaning also ought to contain in it something that indicates to someone considering it what is to be found in its internal meaning, as happens in the case of an apple of gold overlaid with silver filigree work having very small holes. In other words, you're supposed to look at something and say, this is very pretty, but there's something here that I know that if I look more carefully, I'll be able to find something deeper. Many times Chazal will they'll say something fanciful, or they'll say something that, why did they have to say it that way and not that way? And what they're doing is they're coaxing you. And the Nevi'im will speak in that way too. They're actually coaxing you, saying, look more carefully. Really understand what I'm trying to say. When looked at from a distance or with imperfect attention, it is deemed to be an apple of silver. But when a keen-sighted observer looks at it with full attention, its interior becomes clear to him and he knows that it is of gold. The parables of the prophets, peace be on them, are similar. Their external meaning contains wisdom that is useful in many respects, among which is the welfare of human societies, as is shown by the external meaning of proverbs and of similar sayings. When you look at some of the books of Shlomo HaMelech, some of the aphorisms of the sages, you'll discover that they're basically telling you common wisdom. When I say common wisdom, I mean things that you could also find in Confucius or in Aristotle or Socrates, things that are universal wisdoms, okay, like the running of society. Their internal meaning, on the other hand, contains wisdom that is useful for beliefs concerned with the truth as it is. In other words, a deeper sense of reality, something that is perhaps not addressed by contemporary philosophers. Know that the prophetic parables are of two kinds. So in this new paragraph, the Rambam is going to tell us about the verbiage that is used by the Tanakh. Sometimes the verbiage in Tanakh is very rich in its imagery, in its portrayal of an illustration. And we have to understand that every single word in Tanakh, both in the Chumash and in the Navi, is not used wastefully. Every single dugma, every single illustration has a purpose. Let's see. Try another way of going live during your broadcast. No, we'll watch. We'll deal with that later. So he's going to explain. In some of these parables, each word has a meaning, while in others, the parable as a whole indicates the whole of the intended meaning. In such a parable, very many words are to be found, not every one of which adds something to the intended meaning. They serve rather to embellish the parable and to render it more coherent, or to conceal further the intended meaning. So the Rambam tells us that sometimes if you open up a Navi, if you open up a Chumash, and you see a very, very graphically described mashal, a parable, so you know there's always something beneath the surface in every single word. But what is the surface meaning? Why was it so verbose? And so the Rambam says it could be for two reasons. Number one, it could be because it just wants to illustrate better the meaning of the parable. Another reason is that sometimes added verbiage will shroud the inner meaning of the parable even more. Now that's counterintuitive. Normally you think that the more words that you use, the more that you're trying to communicate. But the Rambam says is that sometimes added imagery can sometimes be a diversion, almost like an illusionist who waves his hand over here in order to get you not to see what he's doing with the other hand. Okay? Hence, the speech proceeds in such a way as to accord with everything required by the parable's external meaning. Understand this well. So, the Navi will speak very carefully and will sometimes make a very, very rich illustration with his words, but it's not always that every single word is contributing more to the meaning of what he's trying to, the external meaning at least, to what he's trying to communicate. But that's the second kind. The first kind of parable is where every single word of that parable is communicating something else. Is communicating something that you have to take every single word, pick it apart, and figure out what is being communicated. And sometimes it's difficult to know, and that's why you need someone like the Rambam to sort of guide you through all of the words of the Tanakh and to show you when every single word is supposed to be pulled apart and each word has its own meaning, and when each word cannot be parsed carefully, but rather it's contributing to a whole. So an example of the first kind of prophetic parable is the following text. Now, here's where you have to look at every word, the Rambam says, and every single word is communicating something different. And here the example that the Rambam gives is the story of the Sulam from Parshas Vayetze, where Yaakov goes to sleep and he has a dream. And the Torah says, and V'hinei Sulam Arza, etc. There's a ladder whose feet were firmly planted on the ground, and the head of the ladder goes up to Shemayim. So in this text, and the Rambam's going to set up for us that there are 7 separate messages that are being communicated in a very terse verse. So let's look at it carefully. And here's where the Hebrew might be helpful. So I'll say the Hebrew words as well. The word sulam, the ladder, indicates one matter, one inyan, one subject. The words mutzav arza, it's resting on the feet of the ladder are on the ground. That's a second issue. The words v'rosho magia hashamayma, and its top was going up to heaven. That's indicative of a third issue. And v'hinei malachei Elokim, those are the next words. Behold, the angels of God. That's number 4. The word olim, going up, is a 5th matter. And the words yoridim is a 6th matter. And the words v'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, and behold, these are the words of the second of the very next pasuk, and behold, God was standing over the ladder, is the 7th matter that's being communicated. Thus, every word occurring in this parable refers to an additional subject in the complex of subjects represented by the parable as a whole. Now, interestingly enough, the Rambam is not telling us what those 7 things are. Fortunately, we have some very sophisticated meforshim on the Moreh Nevukhim. So, Rav Chazdai ibn Kreskas tells us, who's one of the Rishonim, who's extremely steeped in Aristotelian philosophy and his understanding of the Rambam especially. He actually wrote a commentary to Aristotle as well, Kreskas, in addition to writing a commentary on the Moreh Nevukhim. And he tells us that what the Rambam is alluding to is that this short passage is describing all of reality that Hashem created in the world. And what is it representative of? There's the earth, and then there's the heavens. There's the physical realm, and then there's the spiritual realm above it. And there's a sulam, there's a ladder that connects everything in the universe from the lowliest on the earth to the highest in the heavens. That it's not a disconnected creation, it's all one unitary creation because it emanates from a unitary God, and that's represented by the sulam. Now, mutzav arza represents the lowest aspects of creation in the physical, corporeal world. V'rosho magia hashamayma, that's the third matter, is that its head reaches the heavens. So you've got the first 3, the sulam, all of existence, that is connected. Mutzav arza, physical matter. Rosho magia hashamayma, spiritual, celestial matter in the heavens. V'hinei malachei Elokim, and behold, the angels of God. Now, an angel is an agent. It's another word for angel. And that there are many agents of Hashem who are affecting different things in the universe. Sometimes those agents of change emanate from above, from the heavenly sources, and affect things that are going on in this world. Sometimes the agents are man, and really man is the only creature of will who can actually create a change of going on in the heavens. So therefore, Malachei Elokim refers to all of God's agents that exist in reality, both human beings who are olim, right, that we affect change by emanating our will from here and going up. That will sort of has a transformative effect on going up in the celestial realms. And v'yordim, and sometimes there is a reactionary effect coming from the angelic forces or the celestial forces which affect man, and that's yordim. Okay? And so that's the next 3. B'nei malachei Elokim are God's agents in this world, the ratzon of Hashem being acted out by his agents, olim, affecting upward, and yordim, affecting downwards. V'hinei Hashem nitzav alav, the 7th, is the idea that God is supervising the entire system. That everything is under Hashem's providence. Nothing happens without Hashem's providence and will, making sure that everything is running according to his will. So that's a beautiful explanation of these 7 different ideas that you can only extract if you carefully parse every single word of that very short passage. Okay? So he says That's an example of where you have to look very carefully at every word of the Navi or every word of the Chumash and be able to pull out an important series of messages. But an example of the second kind of prophetic parable is the following text. Now, we're not going to go through the entire text in Hebrew, but this is a series of passages from the 7th chapter of Mishlei, verses 6 through verse 21. And what these verses are basically telling us is sort of the whole theme of Sefer Mishlei, which is don't get bogged down by the attractions and the allures of the physical world. Focus rather on the main event and the main purpose in life, which is the service of Hashem and trying to attain spiritual perfection. That's really, in a nutshell, the theme of Mishlei. And Shlomo HaMelech, portrays it as a person who sometimes gets beguiled and seduced by a harlot who is married to another man, but she is an adulteress, and she beguiles a man to come to her, and he succumbs to her guile, and that is what Shlomo HaMelech is warning us against. So, for at the window of my house I looked forth through my lattice, and I beheld among the thoughtless ones, I discerned among the youths, a young man void of understanding, passing through the street near her corner, and he went the way to her house in the twilight, in the evening of the day, and the blackness of night and the darkness. Again, it's all descriptive of, the darkness and the murkiness of a person's vision in this world. And behold, there he met a woman with the attire of a harlot and wily of heart. She is riotous and rebellious, etc. Now she is in the streets, now in the broad places, etc. So she caught him, she snares him. Sacrifices of peace offerings were due from me, etc. Therefore came I forth to meet you, etc. I have decked with coverlets, etc. This is all what the woman is saying to him in order to seduce him. I have perfumed my bed, etc. Come, let us take our fill of love, etc. For my husband is not at home, and so, etc. The bag of money, etc. With her much fair speech, she causes him to yield. With the blandishment of her lips, she entices him away. Okay, so that's a very concise extraction from these psukim. So what the Rambam is telling us is, don't bog yourself down with every single word of every single pasuk in this passage in order to find something unique and incisive. The outcome of all this is a warning against the pursuit of bodily pleasures and desires. Accordingly, Shlomo HaMelech likens matter, which is the cause of all these bodily pleasures, to a harlot who is also a married woman. Now, why would Shlomo HaMelech do this? I can understand a harlot. It's a woman who says, come, let me seduce you and pull you away from what you're supposed to be doing, right? So that's a seductive woman, right? Very, right? A man can very easily fall to her seduction. But why does she have to be married? So once again, here we have Kreskus and also Ephodi. They both explain that the psukim here are describing physicality. Now, when you're a philosopher and you subscribe to Aristotelian philosophy, remember we said earlier in this introduction, according to Aristotle, the entire physical world is comprised of form and matter. Do you remember those terms, Surah and Chomer? Form and matter. That's the bifurcation of Aristotle's universe, of Aristotle's reality. And what that means is that matter, physical stuff, adheres to thoughts that exist, and that's how things take shape. Physical things take shape. So you have formless matter, which only exists in theory, and you have matterless form, which also only exists in theory, but the two bonded together create a chair, for example. So a chair has metal, it has fabric. These are all types of matter, but they take the form of a chair and combined together, they are an object. They are a physical object. Every matter, all matter that exists in the universe has to adhere to some form. But what a person does when he is given to seduction is that he tries to take things that are out there that are already adhering to other form, and he tries to ingest them and make them a part of himself so that they adhere to his form. So the classic example is I see a beautiful piece of chocolate cake, right? This beautiful piece of chocolate cake has the matter of all of the calories that are contained within it, but it also has the beautiful form of the dark textured color of the pastry, plus the frosting and perhaps the multicolored frosting and the cherry on top, and all of these different forms that are seductive. So what happens is that I pull the chocolate cake away from its original form, which is a triangular piece of cake in a dish, and I put it in my mouth, and it's now in my stomach, so it no longer has its original form, it now has the form of being now a part of me. So I've pulled it away from its original husband, this matter. The female is matter, the form is male. That's in all of philosophical writings that you'll find universally, also in Jewish writings as well. The Maharal goes a lot into this. And so now the female aspect of this, I've removed it from her husband, and I've made it now a part of me. So that's the general idea as to why the Meforshim say we see significance in this particular parable. Okay, so in fact, his entire book is based on this allegory, and we shall explain in various chapters of this treatise his wisdom in likening matter to a married harlot, and we shall explain how he concluded this book of his with a eulogy of the woman who is not a harlot, but confines herself to attending to the welfare of her household and her husband. And of course, this is towards the end of Sefer Mishlei. Why Shlomo HaMelech describes his lament over such a righteous woman who does not depart from her proper form, that will also explain on a philosophical level. For all the hindrances keeping man from his ultimate perfection, every deficiency affecting him and every disobedience come to him from his matter alone, from his chomer, his physicality, his corporeality, and not from this spiritual or form-related side, as we shall explain in this treatise. This is the proposition that can be understood from the parable as a whole. And I mean that man should not follow his bestial nature. I mean his matter. For the proximate matter of man is identical with the proximate matter of all other living beings. Your physical makeup is no different from all other living beings. And as I've explained this to you and disclosed the secret of this parable, you should not hope to find some signification corresponding to every subject occurring in the parable. That's the point that he wants to make, is that now that I've told you the general overarching idea of what this parable is communicating, you don't need to break down every single word like we did by the illustration or the exercise of the Sulam and come to the same conclusion. So that you could say, what can be submitted for the words, sacrifices of peace offerings were due for me, this day have I paid my vows. What subject is indicated by the words, I have decked my couch with coverlets? And what subject is added to this general proposition by the words, for my husband is not at home? The same holds good for the other details in this chapter, for all of them only figure in the consistent development of the parable's external meaning, the circumstances described in it being of a kind typical for adulterers. Also, the spoken words and other such details are of a kind typical of words spoken among adulterers. Understand this well from what I have said, for it is a great and important principle with regard to matters that I wish to explain. And therefore, the Rambam sort of is suggesting that yes, every single word of the Navi will contribute to a better understanding of the illustration of the parable. But not always will we be able to make a one-to-one correlation between every single word of the Navi and a specific, unique, different idea or principle that is being communicated by this. This is a bit controversial because what the Rambam is essentially suggesting is that sometimes Tanakh is very exact in the words that it chooses, and sometimes it adds certain words to enhance the illustration that's being communicated so a person gets a better idea. And like he said before, sometimes the added words will actually be there to further shroud in mystery the deeper meaning of what is trying to be communicated. Okay, any questions or comments at this point? Quiet group today. We're sort of getting back to ourselves. Okay, so why don't we hold it here for today? Because it's Rosh Chodesh, we have to start a few minutes late. And we will, Be'ezrat Hashem, continue this next Monday. I hope you all have a wonderful day. A guten Chodesh.